Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing Rolls-Royce in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Rolls-Royce opens with e4. What move to play today? Let's play a Caro-Kann, c6. No particular rhyme or reason for why I'm playing a Caro-Kann. Just felt like it, surveying my e4 options. And here, c5 is the most enterprising move against the advanced variation e5. I'm going to play it because lately this move has been getting a lot of attention. It's a bit risky for black, there's no doubt. You're expending 2 tempos on the c-pawn in the first 3 moves, but the goal is to try to get an improved version of a French defense by playing the knight out to c6 and hopefully the bishop outside the pawn chain before playing e6. So he takes, here black can play e6 or knight c6. I think I'll play knight c6 first, just attacking the e5 pawn. I've seen some aggressive ways that white can try to counter this, but I'm hoping that my opponent plays a bit passively and either tries to cling to the pawn or develops in a way that might allow me to seamlessly get the pawn back. Okay, so knight c3, this makes me feel good, actually, because he's blocking his c-pawn, so I don't have to worry about pawn c4 striking at the d5 pawn. Here I could advance d4, or I could just play e6 and then look to recover on c5 on the next move. I think I'll just play e6 because now he can't defend both e5 and c5. So it's possible that knight c3 was an artificial move. Now I'll take this. Maybe he could play queen g4 and try to attack g7, but I don't think I'd have any problem just playing g6 or possibly even the bishop back to f8. All right, knight f3. Let's just play knight ge7, developing. Maybe a6 now, because if I castle, I wonder if knight a4 would be desirable for white, chasing down the dark square bishop. So I might want to play a6 or maybe even bishop d7 to threaten knight takes e5. But on bishop d7, he can still play knight a4. So on the whole, I think I like a6 better. So let's do that. If white takes, taking with the knight is most logical, but taking with the b-pawn would have been an option as well. So he drops the bishop back to d3. I think white will complete their development with bishop f4 soon, and probably rook e1. I don't want to castle, because if I castle, there's bishop takes h7 check, king takes h7, knight g5 check, the old Greek gift sacrifice. So prior to castling, I may need to play a move like h6 to control the g5 square, or I might need to play knight g6 to attack this pawn. I think I should wait on knight g6, though. I'm not sure I want to play that move quite yet, if at all. So I'm going to play b5 and just stake out some space on the queen side. Prepare bishop b7 and see if we can postpone castling for a bit. The position is not open enough that this postponement of castling would matter much, so I feel okay doing this. Now if knight g6, I would hit the bishop on f4, but white would just play bishop g3, which appears fine for them. So let's just continue, bishop b7. I'm expecting something like rook e1 or maybe queen e2 or queen d2. White has all their minor pieces in play, so all those moves I just listed are logical. So rook e1 does weaken f2. I could play queen b6 right now and attack f2. That at least makes white burn another tempo defending. On the other hand, it takes away a flight square from my bishop. If it ever wants to retreat to b6 or a7, my queen would be blocking it. Maybe just h6 instead. Yeah, let's play h6. I think preparing castling is smart, and I may still play knight g6 after castling. Yeah, queen d2, so white takes aim at the h6 pawn. If queen e2 had been played, I would have been more likely to whisk my king away to the king side, but now, if I castle, I'd have to reckon with bishop takes h6. So I still may want to delay castling king side. That said, I can still play knight g6 and try to kick that bishop back to g3. So let's say knight g6. I'm not worried about bishop takes g6, f takes g6. Because I feel like even though I have double g pawns, the f file pressure is nice. So on knight g6, let's assume bishop g3, and then castles, maybe h4, possibly f5 then. E takes f6 en passant, queen takes f6. Yeah, we have a French-like position. Not surprising given the pawn structure. Yeah, I'm going to play it that way. So we'll go knight g6. I'm curious if he'll take on g6 or just drop the bishop back to g3. It's an important decision for white. I would fear bishop g3 more than bishop takes g6, I'll tell you that. Let me check Rolls-Royce's stats while I have a moment. So they've played 25 15-minute games, pretty new account, 20 wins, 5 losses. So they played the move that I was less fearful of. Because now if queen d3, I can just castle. And I don't have to waste time defending this pawn yet because I'm on the bishop on f4. Although, I just noticed that if I castle, there is bishop takes h6. So castles, bishop takes h6, and if I play g takes h, there's queen takes e6 check. Or queen takes g6 check, rather. Followed by winning the h6 pawn. At the very least, white has a perpetual there. Possibly more. So maybe I should not play that way. My backup move was knight e7. Knight e7 looks safe. Just dropping the knight back and defending g6. They could play knight d4 then, though. That's the only problem with that move. If g5, white's going to play queen g6 check, so that doesn't appeal to me either. That's a shame about castles and then bishop takes h6. I wish I could refute that. I mean, rook takes f3, maybe, but looks too risky to allow that capture on h6, and the queen will still be attacking g6. King f7 doesn't look terrible, I have to say, but I think knight e7 on the whole should just be the safest move right now. Yeah, let's just do that and not stress about it any further. So we can't castle yet for fear of bishop takes h6, so I'm just doing the next best thing, I think, defending the pawn. I could foresee my knight being useful on the f5 square. I would play knight d4, though, if I were white right now. Trying to attack this tender e6 pawn. I may even part with my dark square bishop straight away if they do that. So white persists in attacking this g6 pawn. This allows g5, but I guess their contention is that they'll play knight to g6, and then after g takes f4, they take on h8. And it doesn't look like I can trap that knight. I could castle once again here, though. So if I castle, it's a bit different. Bishop takes h6, g takes h6, knight takes g6 is not as devastating. I could even play just rook f7 then. Yeah, let's castle. Because I'm hitting that bishop. And it's strange that the move knight h4 is not helping them, but now that my knight is on e7, white can't lead with their queen in a hitting and winning the g6 pawn. Not to mention, if bishop takes h6, there's even bishop takes f2 check. That's simpler. I take f2, then I take h4. The bishop will be hanging on h6, and so will the rook on e1. And if knight takes g6 now, just knight takes, queen takes, rook takes f4, queen takes e6, king h8. No more checks for white, and we're up a piece. So I think this castling move will encourage them to move the dark square bishop. Because if they don't, we're either going to win the bishop or maybe even get g5 in with a fork in the case of something like g3. If bishop e3, I believe I can play d4, forking the bishop and the knight. So nor does that look good for white. So they might have to play either bishop g3 or bishop back to... Well, I can't even play bishop back to d2 because f2 falls. So yeah, maybe bishop g3 is close to the only move for white. But I am loving my position in that case. I could play g5, or I might start with queen e8, simply guarding g6 and possibly transferring my queen to f7 and attacking the pawn on f2 further. I believe my opponent is pausing because he realizes that the direct moves like taking on g6 or taking on h6 are failing. So he may have to play a retreat move like bishop g3. What about bishop g3, knight f5? Then knight takes g6, knight takes g3, knight takes f8. That's coming up a little short for me. Okay, so I can't play knight f5 right away. So maybe just queen e8. I think queen e8 is helpful. Yeah, play it safe. Defend this pawn further. Then g5 can be played when knight g6 is not available as a response. White would have to go back to f3. And this f-file will be a useful avenue for play for us in the middle game, I believe. The simplest way is just knight f5 next move. Swap the knights, take with the rook, play queen f7, rook f8, triple up on the f-file. Probably white will play f3 at some stage, like move the king and play f3. Hard for them to do that right now, though, because if king h1, bishop takes f2 is playable. Unless on king h1, bishop takes f2, rook takes f2, they could play knight f3. And my rook on f2 would be lacking good retreat squares in that case. So it may not be cut and dry. Nonetheless, I still love my position. Another thing is I can make use of the queen side as well. I want to get the light square bishop into the game, so I'm considering playing b4, making this knight move, and then playing a5, followed by bishop a6, and hit that queen. I do have a half-open c-file to work with, so it makes sense to consider playing on this wing as well. Okay, so white preemptively moves the knight. So g5 will be met by knight f3. We know that. We've established that much. Yeah, I think white's going to make use of this d4 square. I think they've anticipated that they want to put a knight there. It's probably a good idea for them to play the way they are. What else could we do? We could play b4 and continue with that plan, but knight d4 is coming next. So I'm leaning towards knight f5 or g5 just to force this piece back. I could play rook c8. That may not be bad, because then if knight d4, I can take it with my bishop, queen takes, and then I take c2. Okay, so it's important to realize that that is possible. Am I concerned about knight f4 in the next move? I would say no, because I could always play rook takes f4, bishop takes f4, g5. But it should be on my radar. Yeah, I'm just going to start with this, though. Let's get the rook involved. This may rule out the plan with b4 followed by a5 and bishop a6, but that plan was looking slow anyways. I think b4 is more attractive when I was gaining a tempo on the knight. So at least here I'm hampering this plan of knight to d4. Maybe white will play the knight back to f3 voluntarily, and then I can play knight f5. Because otherwise it looks difficult to achieve this move. You can play c3. Now, okay, now I'm looking at b4 again. So c3 is clearly being played to prepare knight d4. I mean, I think he sees my threat down the c file. So b4, c takes b4, bishop takes b4, hitting the rook. Let's say rook e to c1. Yeah, I don't want to start hostilities too heavily on that wing yet. I feel like I need to do some other stuff first. g5, knight f3, knight f5, knight, let's say fd4. They do have a annoying blockade. Maybe bishop back to b6 is good. But knight d4 will hit this pawn. All right, I'm going to go for g5. I'm going to kick this knight back. I want to keep white with the two knights. I don't think exchanging this knight with a move like knight f5 is helping black. I think that assists white more than it does me. Okay, so now maybe bishop b6, or do I play for b4? Or knight f5. Knight f5 is another option. Or even queen g6 and look to trade the queens. I could play queen g6 after we swap the queens, knight d4, and start trying to maneuver. Time is important, though. Time is ticking. b4. I keep going back to this b4 move. And something about it just feels correct. Yeah, I think I'm going to play b4. I'm going to try to open some lines on the other side of the board. If I don't play that move, white might play a3 and try to seal off the queen side for a while. So it might be worth it to just make this advance and try to open things up a bit. Now white could take, they could leave the tension, or they could play a knight into d4. Knight e or f to d4. Against which there's things I can do too, like knight f5 or knight g6, so my queen helps to defend e8. It might depend which knight white uses. So if they take, I take with a bishop hitting the rook. Let's say rook e c1. I might want to have my move prepared against that. He plays knight d4. Okay, so knight e d4. I can take c3, but if I take c3, I mean, at the very least, they could take with a b pawn, and I don't know if I've gained much in doing that. There's knight f5, or that knight g6 move, as I was saying. Knight g6 followed by knight f4 looks kind of slow, though. I'm just going to play knight f5. So let's offer a trade this way. If they take, I wonder if pawn takes is playable. Threatening to crowd the bishop with f4. Looks kind of nice. I could see that dark square bishop being out of the game for quite a while. So knight takes, pawn takes, something like h3, f4, bishop h2. I weaken my d5 pawn, but it's pretty tempting to stifle that dark square bishop. I mean, it would be terrible on h2. There's no question. I wasn't planning to play it this way, but I'm going to try. I'm just curious how white will respond, and it's not the positionally desirable move to make, but I'm doing so for short-term reasons. In the short term, it looks hard for white to deal with f4. So even though rook takes is what you usually want to do, keep the pawn on d5 defended by another pawn and keep the f file open for the rook. But you always have to adapt your thinking to the position in front of you in chess. He responds aggressively, h4. All right, so if I go here and then bishop h2, what if I just keep pressing on with g4? Oh, I'm going to play this move, so let's do that to start. And now on bishop h2, do I play g4? Because g4, they're going to go knight d4. No doubt. Maybe I take on c3 first. Take on c3, they might take g5, though. Okay, another option, queen h5. Queen h5 is kind of neat. Let's do queen h5. So helping to defend the g-pawn. Also, g4 is strengthened. I'm going to have to make some quick decisions. Let's pre-move this capture. They might just play knight d4 now. I hope my queen isn't out of play over here. Knight d4 could try to prove that it's out of play. I'd like to get a rook on the h-file so I could attack. But that's hard to do. If I take, queen takes, rook c4. Actually, I think I am going to take. I know I leave this bishop kind of stranded, but I just didn't see anything good coming of leaving that knight. So now rook here, maybe? Or f3? f3 could be played. Okay, let's play rook here. Because I think he has to play e6 if he wants to stop me from coming rook h6. And maybe queen h3 is playable, but I think e6 will be played. Wow, he's going to ignore this threat, huh? I am surprised by that. Now queen h3 looks mandatory for white. Otherwise, they're going to get hurt. Will practically just be checkmate. Yeah, so queen h3. I hate to have to take that, but I might. I might have to. Okay, so let's take now bishop c8 or something else. Rook takes h3. Now let's do bishop c8. And again, we got to hustle. We got 2 minutes, 18 seconds. So this bishop is still locked in. And I have a lock on the pawn on h3. But I'm also trying to stop e6. I don't want this pawn to come up and spoil my day. I would anticipate something like rook c5. Maybe I can just play rook d8 then. Or bishop e6. Probably rook d8 is better. Rook d8, he might play h4 though, and try to break up my pawns further. I better play bishop e6 just to be safe. Yeah, now he makes a little adjustment. Rook c8, rook c8. Okay, let's see if he bites on the a6 pawn. I'd be happy to give him that pawn. I don't really care about the a6 pawn. He could double up, but if he doubles up, I'm trading and then taking on h3. He is going to bite on that pawn. Okay. All right, now let's come in here. h4. h4 might be playable. Instantly plays that instead. Okay, let's bring this up. If he checks, I'm going king g6, and then I might play the king up to f5. Opposite color bishop positions are always interesting to play, even though they have drawish tendencies. With more pieces on board, you often get attack and counterattack situations involving opposite color bishops. I do like the fact that this bishop is still struggling to get in the game. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I don't like the fact that white has 2 more minutes than I do. I could see him playing rook a7 check. Oh, he's going to do that instead. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to take this way and play it safe. I'll offer a trade of rooks because I know that this bishop is still so horribly out of play. Okay, this makes me feel a lot better now. That rook that was roving for white was the only piece that could truly threaten me. And now it just looks like his pieces are bad. What can he do here? There's almost nothing he can play. Yeah, that move doesn't have a threat because if he plays a3 and I take it, he can't take with a rook because of the back rank checkmate. So I can just do this.
Checkmate.
Yeah, that ended quickly. He blundered into mate. No g2 square. I think he went astray with rook takes a6. I mean, I have a feeling black is better regardless, but rook takes a6 just kills a lot of his play. He kind of got dollar signs in his eyes, it seems to me, and he leapt at the opportunity to win a pawn, but now there's no coordination among white's pieces. Okay. So, yeah, we gambled with e takes f5 because, positionally speaking, that creates weaknesses like the pawn on d5. But because we were able to lock in this dark square bishop, I think it was worth it. Let's go back and see. So this was a Caro-Kann advanced variation, e5 on move 3. I do think this is the most challenging move against the Caro-Kann, and it seems like mainstream theory supports that view. So white just grabs space. Black usually plays bishop f5 and then plays e6, but occasionally you see players playing c5. There's a lot of games with this line too, where you waste a move with your c-pawn, but you try to obtain an improved French. So if white were to play something like c3, knight c6, knight f3, let's say c takes d4, c takes d4, it would allow bishop g4, and black could argue that despite the pawn loss, he's sitting quite nicely because he has pressure on the knight, which is in turn defending d4. And if black plays e6, it won't lock in that bishop. So the critical test is to take the pawn on c5. Yeah, and here, black can play knight c6 or e6. I just played knight c6. I'm not familiar with knight c3. I mostly see white playing knight f3 or bishop b5 here. Both moves intended to defend the pawn. So, knight c3, I'm going to add the engine just right away. I played e6. Yeah, I think e6 makes sense. Defend d5 and also prepare bishop takes c5. Here, now I recovered the pawn. Maybe I should play something different first. The computer seems to think that bishop d7 is better, because in doing that, you threaten knight takes e5. And I suppose if take here and take here, d4 becomes a threat as well. So if bishop e3, for instance, black can play this, and we're opening up an attack on g2. So black will win material. So maybe I can exercise some patience and play bishop d7 as opposed to taking right away. The only downside I can think of taking right away is that white does have an opportunity for queen g4, which probably my opponent should have taken, attacking the pawn on g7. This happens in Frenches a lot too. If the dark square bishop comes out, like in a Winnower, for instance, or McCutcheon variation, many lines of the French, white will respond with queen g4 and attack that pawn on g7. So instead, knight f3 was played. I played knight e7. White castled. I played a6. So if I just castled here, I was concerned that white would play knight a4 and my bishop would be lacking squares. Yeah, I guess I could play bishop b4 and then maybe snake it back like this, but a6 puts the question to this bishop and also provides a retreat square. So I think it's fine. So they played bishop back to d3, and I went for b5. I am happy to see that the computer thinks my position is already pretty good. I should mention that if I castled instead, there was the possibility of bishop takes h7. And if you don't know this theme, you should Google it. It's called the Greek gift sacrifice. whereby you sacrifice a bishop on h7, or if you were black, it would be h2, and then you follow with a knight check. And the problem is, if black's king scurries back, then white gets queen h5 in, and they're threatening queen h7 mate. The bishop has succeeded in destroying the pawn cover in black's position. And this will be very bad for black. You don't want this to happen to you. Sometimes the Greek gift sacrifice doesn't work. If it's not working, it's usually because black can cover h7 somehow. Like, if my pawn were not here and I could play bishop f5, that would be fine, because then I'd be covering this square. So I just played b5, not castling yet. Bishop b7. Played h6, because again, if I castle, it's the same tactic. Nothing's really changed. So h6, queen d2, and now knight g6. The engine thinks I should hold off on this further. Rook c8, yeah, rook c8 makes sense. Ooh, g5 would be aggressive. I didn't consider g5. g5, bishop g3, knight b4, and try to go after the light square bishop. The problem with playing a move like g5 is that you completely reveal your hand as far as king safety. I mean, after g5, I'm probably not going to be castling short because I've already thrust the h and the g pawns up the board. Queenside isn't looking too safe either most of the time, so I might be keeping my king in the center. So g5 is committal. On the other hand, I think knight g6 provides some clarity, and it does prepare castling next move. Oh, note that I didn't castle here, because even though bishop takes h7 is not a threat, bishop takes h6 is a threat. White has the queen on d2, and should I accept this bishop sacrifice, I have new problems on h7, involving the queen and bishop coordinating, and also maybe knight g5, if I defend against that initial threat. So here, and I thought white should play bishop g3. I considered this to be a safer move, but maybe in view of what happened, take, and queen d3, maybe I miscalculated, although the computer is saying castles. So on castles hitting the bishop, I was afraid of this move. Did I miss something? Because the idea would be that if I take, I'm allowing this. He gets to check me around a lot and win a bunch of pawns, and my king is open. But if castles bishop takes h6, there's rook takes f3. I thought about this briefly. Because after g takes, I can play queen h4. And not even bother capturing the bishop. And in doing so, I'm attacking the bishop, and also I'm threatening f2. What if bishop e3? Knight takes e5. Okay, hitting the queen, hitting f3. And then I would assume if something like this, d4 is going to crush, opening the light square bishop. Yeah, engines are just such an excellent tool to utilize when the position becomes tactical, because the engine just finds this in a flash. I was worried about bishop takes h6, but the counterstroke, rook takes f3, works out in black's favor. G takes f3 thanks to this queen h4 move. And currently black is down 3 points of material, but it doesn't matter because the engine sees my threats as being so strong that they even fully compensate for the material, more than compensate. That's a nice line. Yeah. But I played it safe with knight e7, just guarding the g6 pawn. I thought knight h4 was a mistake. I didn't like that move for white. It's too direct. I mean, knight h4 is only going to work out if something tactically appears on g6 or h6 or both squares. But since I'm able to just castle and attack the bishop, I think white's idea is failing. So here I played queen e8. And already the engine likes black a lot, but g5 was stronger. And then if knight f3, knight f5, knight e2, this looks kind of similar to the game. White will try for this, but I haven't moved my queen yet, so maybe I can use my queen on a different square, a more aggressive square like b6. Create a queen-bishop battery and also id4. I think I didn't like g5 because of knight g6, but maybe, yeah, rook f5, knight takes e7, queen takes e7. This does look good with rook af8 coming quickly. I didn't see rook f5. Rook f5 is a nice response to knight g6. Otherwise, if I take, I would have to take a moment to defend against queen takes e6. Even this is good, according to the computer. Okay, so queen e8, possibly an unnecessary move. Keeps black's advantage, but g5 was more to the point. So white went knight e2, and I played rook c8. Again, the engine says something that kind of surprises me, d4. Opening the light square bishop at the expense of blocking the dark square bishop. Huh. And in doing so, I suppose that black has in mind g5, when knight f3 might be met by bishop takes f3. So we do create more threats down this diagonal. Because this was my bad piece in the resulting play. It was hard to get that light square bishop involved. I have a hard time making a move like d4 because it just looks so ugly with my bishop on c5. Your bishop on c5 will be like, hey, what about me? But yeah, there is something to be said for opening that light square bishop. So I played rook c8, kind of a sly move. Idea being that if they play knight d4, we can take and then go grab on c2. So white saw that and played c3. And here I went g5, knight f3, and then b4. Sometimes when you have an attractive position, there can be a dilemma about where to play, like what area of the board to play on, because you may have several tantalizing options. So, I mean, I'm looking at playing on the queen side. I considered moves like queen g6 or knight f5, but also I was looking at my potential on the queen side as well. Playing b4 and opening things up, using the c-file, that half-open c-file to my advantage. So that's why I went with b4. Seems reasonable. White played here, attacking the d4 pawn. I played knight f5, defending with my queen and offering a trade. So now, moment of truth. I took with the e-pawn. Yep, and the engine endorses this move. What if I take with the rook? So if I take with the rook, black remains slightly better. Guess there's not a whole lot of a difference between e takes f5 and rook takes f5. But if the engine gives this as its top move, I know it was a valid idea. So yeah, this is a great example of adjusting to the circumstances in chess and how you can't just apply rules to your play. From a pawn structure point of view, e takes f5 is terrible, giving me an isolated d-pawn. But in view of this bad bishop for white on g3 that is on the verge of being trapped, we can justify e takes f5. So the short-term factors override the long-term factors in this case. White played h4. Yeah, maybe h3 was a bit safer. Because then, if h3 is played, I'll have a harder time playing g4. And also white's king is safer. Like I can't just play queen h5 and hope to checkmate him because I have a pawn on h6. So this would still be good for black, I think. But yeah, maybe I would have a harder time getting through after h3, f4, bishop h2. Queen b5 is the engine's move here. That's an interesting strategy. I thought about that briefly too, because if I can enforce a queen trade, this bishop may be so destitute over on the h2 square and so far removed from the action that it's like black is playing up a piece for now. So big advantage to black in that case. Instead, he plays h4, more combative. I advance and attack the bishop here. And now I went queen h5, and I was kind of questioning whether my queen belonged over here. It was hard to say with 3-4 minutes remaining. On g4, I thought white would just play knight d4, and I wouldn't have a chance to get in g3. Here, queen e7 is recommended, attacking the pawn. And if white wants to defend it, they have to play this, after which that bishop is completely buried. It's just a pawn on h2, basically. That would be a funny scenario. Yeah, I didn't consider that. I didn't consider going after this h4 pawn with queen up to e7. So I do see why g4 followed by queen e7 has value. Instead, I played queen h5. We traded. And now knight d4. Okay, so the engine really hates that move for white. Instead, it prefers e6. I was worried that this pawn might run at some stage, because that frees up the e5 square, And also the pawn is just 2 squares away from promotion, so it's going to distract me. Still an edge for black, but maybe better than knight d4. So on knight d4, the computer still wants to go g4. What's so good about this? Why is this minus almost 2 now in black's favor? Let's just say white plays some normal move, rook a d1. B takes c3, b takes c3, rook c7. I don't know if there's a concrete reason why it likes this. Maybe just the fact that g3 will open this diagonal whenever black so chooses. It's about the only thing I can think of. Also, it does stop queen h3. As you saw in the game, queen h3 was pesky. Surprised, though. I'm surprised that the computer thinks this is so one-sided. -3 in black's favor now. Yeah, I think safe to say that g4 move was more important than I thought. I wanted to keep the pawn here for a while because I like the fact that it helped to defend f4 and keep this bishop trapped, but advancing the pawn probably just creates more threats, bottom line. Yeah, and if ever this is played, g3 is just going to kill white on the spot. I can ignore the attack on my rook. I'm hitting f2 and I'm hitting h2. White can't allow this to happen. So instead, I took on d4. I was just worried that my bishop would kind of get buried, and I wanted to simplify and really drive home the point that this bishop is a bad piece, and even though my bishop isn't the greatest on b7, it has more potential than white's. But in retrospect, I wish I would have kept this piece for the aforementioned reason. Attacks f2. So here, yeah, he took with the c-pawn, and then I lifted this rook. So this is a creative idea, coming over to h6. I wonder if he saw that rook h6 was a threat. And I thought for sure white would want to play something like e6 to stop me from doing that. Maybe even this is good for black, but rook c1 seemed almost indifferent to the threat of rook h6. Yeah, now white does have queen h3, but has this helped their chances? And here, I should not trade queens. I should play queen g6 instead. Thought about that, but I just thought he would play queen g4. Oh, that's cute. Queen h7. That's a little tough to see. That's a nice maneuver. Oh, I love that. So here we're leading with our queen. We have a queen-rook battery with the queen in front. So it's stronger to move the queen, attack white's queen, and then assuming their queen moves somewhere, and sneak the queen in behind. Lovely. Attacking h2, and white cannot defend that bishop. So if queen h3, now we just take it, of course. Instead of losing a pawn, white loses a rook for a queen. Queen for a rook. Neat. I like that. Okay. Yep. Underestimated that. So I just took and then played bishop to c8. I think this h3 pawn is a goner no matter what, so I don't need to play rook takes h3. I thought it was more important to keep an eye on e6, stop him from easily playing pawn e6, and maybe keep my rook on the 6th rank to prevent any infiltrations. White has to get crafty somewhere right around here. Like the computer's suggesting a move like h4, because even though he's losing this pawn, if I play rook takes h4, at least now e6 is playable, my rook is not guarding that square. This could create confusion, and with 2 minutes, I mean, who knows what's going to happen. I am still for choice here by a nice margin, but this looks scarier than what happened in the game. In the game, white gave me pretty much everything I wanted and allowed me to consolidate. So when you're in a tough position like this, and I think white should recognize that they're worse here, you have to try to find ways to disrupt your opponent's play. I mentioned this in a recent video too. You have to go into guerrilla warfare mode and put yourself in black's shoes and say, with 2 minutes and 18 seconds on the clock, what would be most unpleasant for my opponent to face here? What would black not want to see? And I think black would not want to see a disrupting move like h4, because I want my rook glued to this square. And if I take with a pawn, then the bishop has a better chance of being able to attack this in the future. Yeah, f3 and maybe king up. This rook will have to stay glued to guarding f4. Black's still up a pawn and doing well, but it's less clear. So instead he played rook c5. I defended bishop e6, rook c6, rook c8 offering a trade. And let's just see if rook takes a6, tips the game massively in black's favor, because that was a move I criticized for white. The engine says trade the rooks. So rook takes c8, bishop takes c8, rook c1. I assume take on h3, f3, and black's up a pawn, but white is still fighting. So let's see what it thinks about rook takes a6. Not as bad as I thought. It likes rook takes c8 better, but this is still under a pawn advantage. Rook c2, b3, okay, king f7. I played king f7 simply to defend the bishop again and get ready to play perhaps rook takes h3. Advantage is creeping up for black. Okay, now it's at, getting closer to -2. So maybe b3 is to blame. a4 is a better chance trying to run the a pawn. Rook takes b2, a5, rook a2, get behind the pawn. Yeah, again, at least white has something to point to for counterplay, as opposed to the game where they didn't have any counterplay to speak of and a few more moves. I still think rook takes a6 is wrong. I wouldn't go for this pawn. Yeah, trading looks better. So anyways, after king f7, white played rook d1. I'm not sure what rook d1 does. Maybe they were afraid I was going to go after the d pawn with something like this, but that wasn't really in my plans. I was mostly just looking to win the h pawn and keep the status quo elsewhere. I like my rook on c2 because I can always take a2 should white's rook wander away. Well, I did think they might do something like this, and then rook back to a7 and go after the g7 pawn. Maybe that g7 pawn doesn't even matter. Rook takes g7, rook takes a2. Now rook takes b3 could be played. And black's king feels comfortable on f5, it seems. Okay, so it's possible that's also not great for white. And again, the computer was suggesting h4 maybe as an option. Here it doesn't really have the desired effect, though, does it? H4 doesn't force me to take with a pawn. I've got my bishop defended. So that was one nice benefit of playing the king up to f7. Maybe white could have played it here instead of b3. What about h4 now? So that I can't do this for fear of losing the bishop. That's the type of move that you have to find, I think, if you're white trying to scratch and claw your way back in the game here, especially with your opponent being low on time. Set me some problems. But he instantly played b3. He spent 2 seconds on that move. So after that rook d1 move, I took on h3 with the bishop. Yeah, now you hear me say I felt very comfortable now. It was almost like I was breathing a sigh of relief because the white just looked helpless despite having a protected pass pawn. And materials is actually just equal here. But you see how the engine thinks this is winning for black, because this bishop just doesn't play. And his rook is glued to the back rank. Rook takes a2 as a threat. He played rook a1 to defend, and yep, I brought up my king. So white should wait here, but he lacks moves even to wait, doesn't he? Huh, that's funny. Yeah, it's almost Zugzwang here. He can't move the bishop anywhere safely. If king h1, I can take on f2. There's no other legal king moves. f3 is never going to help him. Yeah, something like bishop g2 and go after this weak pawn. So he's left with a pawn moves and rook moves. And if the rook moves, he loses a2. And if he moves the a pawn, as you saw in the game, I can just take on a3. Either en passant or otherwise, the normal capture. Yeah, he's just dead. Yep. Picturesque position right here. Zugzwang. Yeah, his position's so bad, bishop takes f4 is the best move. Sack the bishop. But he went out after rook takes a3, just got checkmated. But yeah, there's nothing to be done. If he plays the b pawn forward, I can just play a2, and then rook b2 followed by rook b1. And again, white is helpless. Okay, well, I liked how that endgame turned out. Partly because I won, obviously. It's always nice when you win an endgame. But I think I could have played the position a bit better. There were certain improvements that the computer pointed out based on tactics that I did not appreciate in the game. Like right here, this is a big one. Queen d3, I played knight e7, and I wanted to play castles. I just didn't see that castles, bishop takes h6, rook takes f3, g takes f3, queen h4. idea. That would have been nice to spot. Queen e8 was inaccurate. I could have played for g5 directly, the engine thought. This idea was good. E takes f5, so I'm glad I did that. Probably I shouldn't trade on d4, and instead I should go for pawn g4, whereupon white is kind of stuck. I underestimated how valuable pushing the pawn to g4 is. It stops queen h3 and ties white down significantly. The endgame was okay. I don't have too many qualms about how I played the endgame. And I think once we get our rook down to c2, we're doing excellently. Black has a splendid position to work with. Yeah, so for white, I think this whole line with knight c3 is not so good. I think it's better to play, as I was saying, bishop b5 or knight f3 in response to knight c6 on move 4. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll be back soon with another video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.